Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Blockchain Gamer.biz's weekly roundup. Today is the 4th of July. Happy American Independence Day to all our US listeners. And I'm Jenny Jordan. With me is John Jordan. Hi, John. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm not going to talk about the breakup of the great United Kingdom and America.
No.
That should have been. Let's not go down that route.
That'll be its own podcast sometime when we do.
Would they be happier without?
Yeah, we said not to. Right. Kick off with the biggest news of the week. As of last night, actually, was announced. John Smedley has announced a new PC game coming to Steam later this year. It's a Web3 looter shooter called Reaper Actual. And there's a few sort of little surprising things here. It's coming to Tezos Etherlink, which is not an EVM compatible chain, and is kind of not really It is. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But it's not sort of the blockchain jumping at you, known as a gaming kind of chain. No. It's raised 30.5 million so far. Obviously not recently, but over time. But it's announced now as this the game has sort of decloaked now. So tell us a little bit more about this and what John Smedley sort of has said. He's very confident, isn't he, that everything else has gone wrong in Web3, but he's doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of funny. There's been sort of rumors this week. People were just like, "Oh, there's this really big game is going to get announced," and blah blah blah. And so, sort of to announce it, the just before American Independence sort of day, where everyone's on holiday, sort of a bit of odd thing, I think. Anyway, yeah, I mean, the whole thing, without being my typical sort of all sort of negative about stuff, there are some. I think there are some sort of red flags here, or there are some flags of indeterminate colour that I would just sort of throw up here. So, as you say, the weirdest thing about it is that it is it's using effectively Tezos's EVM chain. So Tezos, I think it's a reasonable sort of blockchain in the sense that there's hundreds of blockchains out there, and Tezos has been around for a while. And I think it's one of the sort of better run from an organizational point of view, but it's not really, it's not one that anyone talks about, and it's not one that degens get excited about. It's one of those blockchains that sort of you sort of think, sort of, what's it there for? And I think over time, every blockchain, whether it wants to or not, sort of ends up with the use case that its audience sort of want. So. And Tezos just hasn't, you can use it for anything, and they've got sort of serious people there, so they try all these different things, and at one point it was sort of where they sort of had a bit of an art market, NFT art market there. Some people were saying, Tezos has it's an interesting place to buy cheap NFT art and stuff, but that sort of fizzled out, and obviously they have tried games. They've got a sort of game sort of department really, and I guess most famously Ubisoft launched its first NFTs on Tezos, and people have tried to do games on Tezos, and there's no reason technically I think that you can't do games on Tezos apart from the fact that no one does games on Tezos. So it's the same thing. You might say the same for Cardano. People have done games on Cardano, but no one really cares, and we don't go through all the lists. I mean, Tron back in the day, people used to do games on Tron, and no one cares less. And now it's just like basically Tether's blockchain for doing stablecoin stuff. So that's sort of the one weird thing is if you were starting with a blank sheet of paper and going, what blockchain are we going to end up on? Tezos. It's not like Tezos wouldn't be in the top 10. It's just, and particularly if they're sort of using Tezos's EVM chain. So obviously they want to be EVM because that's where all the action is. So they're using Tezos's EVM. I mean, just like, why don't you just use an EVM chain? I mean, it's just it's really, and I don't think that's a I don't think that kills the project, but it's just odd. It's just an odd way of doing it. And I would love to know why on earth they chose Tezos. And even games, I mean, like, overkilling it, but there was Dagami was like one of the sort of key games that did use Tezos and was like a proper team that raised money, and they're doing this virtual dog stuff, this dog NFT things. And they just didn't get anywhere, and in the end they sort of tried to move to Polygon. So that's a bit odd. I think maybe one of the reasons is they really want to. When John Smedley says this is Web3 done right. I think they want the blockchain really not to exist to any users. So they don't want to get in the situation where, blockchain people are excited about this game because it's a blockchain game. So one way of doing that is to use the most obscure blockchain you sort of could. That could be one way of thinking about it, but I still think it's odd. The other thing, talk a bit about John Smedley. So he's not someone who's talked about very much at the moment. I mean, he's I don't know how old he'd be. I imagine he'd been in his 60s now. I don't know, probably late 60s. I did actually see him at a conference about a year ago. So people have known in the industry that he is in this field. But I remember being somewhat underwhelmed by his conversation on a panel about. Obviously, he didn't say what he was doing, but it just strikes me that he is one of he falls into a little bit of the bucket of some of these people coming to the end of their career. Who still sort of want to make games or still want to feel like they're sort of part of the games industry, and they have great experience. So I'm certainly not knocking that a 60-year-old can't make a great game, but they I think when you get to that age, and he's been very successful in games. So he's I don't know how rich he is. He's not a billionaire probably, but he's not a not rich man, And I think you at that sort of age, you're sort of probably you're probably not burning the candle at both ends to get your startup going, So I think you become a little bit detached. When something like blockchain comes along, we've seen it a little bit, like Will Wright, really famous Sims guy, was doing a blockchain game for a while, and then that fell apart. And then obviously Peter Molyneux raised $50 million for his game, and I did actually talk to Peter about that, and I never really got the impression he quite understood what blockchain was about. So it's a little bit about sort of funding, and at the moment with game funding as it is, I'm not terribly sure John Smedley would get $30 million off anyone else to make this sort of game. So it's a little bit, we sort of talk about funding not being so big in blockchain games at the moment, but for the right sort of people, it is actually a place where you can get funding to do these sort of things. So that's a bit odd. I mean, the funding people, let me see, it is, they haven't, obviously you say that they've announced $30.5 million of funding. Obviously that's that money's been given out a long time ago. They're announcing it now with the game and stuff. Obviously, they've made the game. They've spent the money sort of making the game. So there's Bitcraft, who obviously have done a lot of stuff in Web3 gaming, although not a lot recently. And also Brevin Howard Digital, who again, not that well known. Brevin Howard are a really big sort of investor, sort of PE sort of company, and they've looked at a lot of game stuff. They've invested in some other things. Sequence, I think, is one of their other sort of big investments. I imagine this money changed hands a few years ago. So maybe you wouldn't make that decision now. There's a bunch of other people as well. Obviously, Tezos have invested and some other sort of smaller ones. The game as well. PC. It's a really big sort of open world. So they've been really stressing how massive the sort of map is. And it's a sort of looter shooter, which I would say was the sort of genre that sort of peaked in terms of interest about a couple of years ago. So people really like it. There's a game called Escape from Tarkov that was a massive sort of niche success on PC. And these sort of games, often it's squad based. So you go in as a squad. In this case, it's 4 people. You go into a squad and you're sort of raiding. In this case, you're raiding someone else's base, so everyone has a base, and you're raiding someone else's base and nicking their stuff, basically. And that's been a genre that people have tried to do it different ways. Tarkov, Escape from Tarkov, was a really sort of realistic sort of type game, really hardcore. So people who liked it, loved it, and played it a lot. But there wasn't tons of them, so everyone's been thinking, how can I sort of keep the risk reward of that game while making it more mass market? And it's not really worked out. There's been some really expensive failures in that sort of genre. So we'll sort of see the shine has come off that genre a little bit. And obviously, because you need sort of a squad of people, it works better if you know the people. So immediately you've got sort of a matchmaking thing about getting 4 people together to raid someone else's base. You're making it a really big. It's obviously massive 3D shooter game. They are fairly expensive to make in terms of sort of assets and stuff. I don't know if they're using a lot of AI. I wouldn't think so. So 30 million doesn't go very far making these sort of very big sort of games. And you're competing again, obviously, lots of people have made these sort of games. So you're competing with all those other games. And as we've discussed in the past with like Off the Grid, really high end game, but it's competing with Call of Duty and games that cost billions of dollars to make. So you always get that comparison with the first person shooter. People who love first person shooters really immediately they can play a game within like 10 seconds. They know if they like this game or not. And it's a really, they can sort of explain why they like it, but actually it's just they've played so much of them. It's just the movement and how you sort of target and how you do those things combined in a way. And is it realistic or is it sort of over the top sort of movement and jetpacks? And there's lots of ways of doing that. And it's just a very, very competitive market to get into. And whether you're doing a blockchain game or not, it wouldn't be a market at the moment that I would think lots of people are going to invest for new content in there.
But when you say that they're probably not going to market is mainly sort of a blockchain game, because that's maybe a reason they've gone on Tezos EVM, and it's been launched via Steam, so that would sort of mean it's clearly going to be dominantly a Web2 game with perhaps some optional Web3 features. Is that what you're thinking, or do you know?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure they have said Steam. I think it's actually Epic Games Store. They sort of said this. It's exactly how they're doing it, but it's because Steam, I still think wouldn't let them do it. I don't know. There is some. So they have sort of said that you get these bases, and to begin with, it's sort of when they're in early access, you'll have to basically spend money to play the game, and in that case, you're basically buying a base. But you could just do that you're buying a base and not getting the NFT. But if you want to, you could sort of create it as an NFT. So I think that's how they're seeing this sort of Web3 stuff, Web3 done right, in the sense that it is a Web2 game, but with optional Web3 sort of stuff in there, and you will be able to some of the loot items as well. They'll be on a marketplace, so again a bit like Off the Grid, which is also a sort of that's slightly different, but that's equally a sort of looter shooter type thing. It's more like a battle royale thing, but equally there is this sort of idea of. And Shrapnel again, another sort of looter shooter. So, so we, until we get a bit more detail about exactly how they're doing it, we'll sort of see. But equally, I think that's sort of tricky. No one's got that bit right. Lots of people say, we work Web3 in the background and we don't force anyone. The examples we've sort of seen is sort of the Mythical game stuff we talk about a lot, FIFA Rivals, at the moment, where it is all blockchain, but it's all in the background. You don't, if you're playing the game, 99% of people playing that game don't know they've got a wallet in the background and these things are NFTs and these things are not. They don't really explain that sort of, overtly. But as soon as you sort of have these, I think this is sort of a different sort of scenario. And I think with some games, you want to lean into the Web3 a little bit. Now that's harder, I think, because obviously this sort of thing is they want mass market audience, and as soon as you sort of start talking about Web3, then obviously people are going to get turned off. But equally, there's all these people who hate Web3 and like to tell everyone this is a Web3 game, don't play it. So you can't really hide the Web3. On mobile, it doesn't care less. No one cares less about mobile games, so no one's going to go around telling mobile game players, FIFA Rivals, that's an NFT game. This is just a different audience. But when you get to these hardcore genres, even because it's all sort of about getting a social sort of network going, even if 10% of your really hardcore players just go, this is blockchain slop or whatever term they use, it makes it much harder to sort of get the sort of social friend things going. Because if we need 4 players, me, you play, and 2 others, and then one of them goes, this is blockchain slop, then they don't play, so then we don't have 4. It really causes a lot of friction in the system. So we'll see. The other thing just about Smedley as well is John Smedley is he was a little bit controversial. So he was a programmer and he worked on some very early MMORPGs. EverQuest is a pretty sort of famous one, and that was really quite a groundbreaking. There was Ultima Online and EverQuest were these 2 first online persistent games where you had a character and walked around and did things in the game. Really really quite innovative. And then he basically his company got bought by Sony, and then he moved on to Sony and did some stuff with Sony more, but on the shooter side. Sort of PlanetSide was one of the big ones, which wasn't really, was pushing the technology a bit too hard and wasn't really a great success actually at the time. And he became a bit of a notorious character actually. So he was sort of, he's not like a game designer type guy, although he sort of has been involved in that. But he's more like a sort of, a sort of executive, a gaming executive. So he ran this sort of Sony Online Entertainment, it was called. But he wasn't like a much loved sort of figure. I won't go into the sort of details, but he's as I say, he's someone with a name, and that's how he's got this sort of funding. But he's he's not like a Peter Molyneux or a Will Wright. And whenever you think about them, those are people with really interesting brains about game design, and some of their games maybe are awful, and some of them too complicated.
We're getting a little bit
okay.
away from myself now. Right, let's talk about.
That's enough of that.
Yeah, that's enough of that. Let's move on to FIFA Rivals, which you mentioned, and you did mention the blockchain in the background and the NFT features in there, and that's actually been an exciting update this week, because for the first time now you can sort of put together your fragments that you're earning through gameplay, or you can go on the marketplace and buy them. And you can put them together into full players now, NFTs. And so now we've seen the first sort of mega superstar Lionel Messi be made. There are some other big names in there as well, like Rodri and well, it's not my kind of game, but a few sort of big ones. So that's obviously an exciting feature for players. What's happened on the marketplace? Have you seen any sort of big sales?
No,
changes?
I haven't seen this. No, it's not. It's hard to see. You can sort of see real-time sales. You can't really see at the moment. I'm not seeing any way of seeing historic sales. But yeah, I think the interesting thing here is, this is very new compared to FIFA, NFL Rivals, where you basically, to make an NFT, you got the player as a non-NFT, and then you got this thing called a blueprint that sort of was an NFT, but then had to merge them together to make the NFT. So that was the process there. Fairly simple. In FIFA Rivals, you can just take a base digital asset, and if you level it up enough, it takes quite a lot. You basically spend a special resource and level it up 5 times. Then you can make it into an NFT. But that's for the sort of the lower level rarity characters. There's these other characters called the mythics, and they're the very top sort of players in the world. So the ones that people will have heard of, although maybe some of them that people won't have heard of. But Lionel Messi's there, Harry Kane, that sort of level of sort of brand recognition. Interestingly, people like Ronaldo aren't there yet, so I don't know how they get special licenses for that. I don't know how you have to handle that sort of thing. But anyway, the interesting thing is there's 5 fragments for each of these players. And it's not like you just get 5 fragments. You have to get one of each of the fragments. It's sort of like they split the card up into 5 bits. So you have to get each corner and the middle, effectively. And what's interesting there is, you're never going to get that within the game. I mean, it's almost impossible to get the individual fragments for a particular player that you want in the game. So you're going to have to go to the marketplace. So it's quite a clever way of getting people, some of these fragments can be quite obviously valuable because different people are going to need different ones. Maybe you do unlock some of them in the game, but then you need to go and buy the other ones. So you need to go to the marketplace. So as soon as anyone gets one of these fragments, they're immediately going to probably put it on the marketplace, because that's where sort of the value comes from. And even like a fragment could be like $100 or something like that, because obviously you need that to put them together and then make the overall thing, which you can try and sell for maybe not thousands. I mean, I say like Messi's up there for 11,000. There's only 2 of them at the moment, so those prices will come down as more of those characters are created. But like Rodri, I think was like 600, and there's other legendary characters who are just not, who are the same sort of ranking in the game, like 96, 95 power in the game, which is very high, who are just like $300. So it's a massive multiplier just for the name recognition of getting a Messi. But it's what's interesting is the way I think it's building the overall sort of trading aspect of that, and that's all at the moment on the Mythical market. I don't know how they're going to bring that in the game. I'm sure they will bring that in the game, because they've done that quite effectively within an NFL Rivals. So again, going back to you don't need to go to the marketplace. You can just do it within the app, and at that stage, people won't really, people don't necessarily know they're NFTs, but they're their in-game assets they can sort of sell and then obviously cash that out. So it's a good model, I think.
Good. Right. Let's talk about Lumiterra on Ronin, which has seen a big spike in users and actually spiked sort of overall Ronin traffic quite significantly as well. Yeah. I think this is the second airdrop campaign they are running ahead of the Lumi token is actually not launched yet. It's launching 9th.
It's all a little bit complicated. So I could get some of this stuff wrong. But so last year they had 2 what they called closed beta tests. And I assume people there was a way of sort of getting assets then. I don't think they were doing that as getting tokens, but maybe just people got the wrong end of the stick. But anyway, as you say, those were massive. Like one of them peaked at over 800,000. But that's not people playing the game. That's people clicking on websites around it. So you have to be always a little bit careful. We're just measuring wallets interacting with smart contracts, which could be in a game or could not be in a game. So anyway, so last year, as opposed to for all the games sort of in development for Ronin, Lumiterra was the biggest one by far. Had these very big spikes. I mean, they didn't last a long time, but they were very high. And now it's what it's called now. MegaDrop Part 1 is actually a token airdrop. So 10% of the Lumi token is being rewarded to people. There's various different ways. There's 3 different pools. Won't go into all the details, but one of them is using sort of social media, sort of social farming stuff. And one of them is if you have in-game assets and you stake them, then you're getting a reward for that as well. So I guess people know this time they're actually going to get a token allocation. I guess what's interesting is since then, so the game itself is an MMORPG. I've not really played it in any depth. It's pretty deep. It's got all the, your farming stuff. You're going out and fighting, and you can capture creatures a bit like Pokemon. You can put them in your farm. That's the whole sort of play world, power world sort of thing as well. And there's loads of crafting, and there's loads of tech trees. I mean, it's really quite a deep MMORPG, which is what people expect. It's sort of pixely. It's a bit sort of kiddie graphic wise. I don't think it's so impressive on the graphic side, but it's got all the sort of the deep stuff you need. And obviously you can go and raid dungeons, and you have PvE, PvP. I think certainly you have guilds and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite deep. They've been making the game for a long time, and everything's sort of on chain. So all the sort of resources and the crafting stuff is all on chain. So that's it works really well as a concept for those sort of games. The problem with those sort of games, as with everything, is can you get enough people into it? So we'll sort of see if this gives it a big enough spike to then. It's not like the game's not live yet properly, although you can play it. Sort of it's not connected to the blockchain yet, as far as I can see. So, but it is still. I think we've seen lots of games on Ronin sort of be fairly successful in sort of these sort of airdrop campaigns, and then the game goes live and nothing happens. I mean, some really good ones like was it the Wild Forest? Yeah. But ones that I really liked, and then they just sort of for various reasons sort of died a death. So we've seen quite a lot of that. Whether Lumiterra can get over that sort of hump and actually sort of attract that audience, we'll have to wait and see. But, as you say, not much has been happening for Ronin for a while, and this has sort of woke everyone up again.
Yeah. So this week you also had an interesting conversation with Rob Whitehead. Well, it actually didn't take place this week, but the podcast came out and the interview came out this week. From MSquared. He is the CEO of a UK company, and they are building. This is not the most significant thing they're building, but as of now, that is sort of the thing in making headlines. With Chunked, the version 2 has just dropped, which is like a fully on-chain kind of Minecraft. But clearly, they're doing they're supporting Yuga Labs, the other side metaverse. They're basically building like a underpinning engine to support these big metaverses. You would say more significantly. And they're building up. They got connections with the Somnia blockchain as well. That's where they have launched. Waiting to go on mainnet, isn't it? It's still on test. Yeah. So talk us through a little bit your sort of takeaways from the interview and his kind of vision.
Yeah. So this is sort of the second part of an interview. So I did an interview with Improbable CEO Herman Nerera. I can't remember. Something like that. Nerero. And sort of Improbable is a UK games company, a UK sort of games tech company, been around for over a decade, raised tons of money, hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's sort of in the first sort of wave, they had this sort of tech called Spatial OS, and it was supposedly a way of building like fully on-chain, massively multiplayer sort of games in a much more sort of efficient way. And it sort of didn't work. They tons of game developers were using it. Not tons, half a dozen developers were using it for these sort of games, and they basically none of them sort of worked out. It all sort of shut down. But the technology actually was used in like a lot of defense industry stuff, and so often a lot of games tech is useful in other sort of types of industries. So it didn't really work for games, but it did work for these other things, and they spun off their defense unit. Obviously, defense units are pretty hot at the moment with geopolitical sort of stuff going on. So they were sort of successful in a secondary sort of market, and it seems like, in my mind, they sort of come back to have another go at something like Spatial OS. So it's a different sort of tech, but basically, MSquared is the company. It's fully owned by Improbable, but it's its own separate company. And Rob Whitehead, who was actually he was the CTO, the chief technical officer at Improbable. So he was a co-founder there. So this is now his sort of particular sort of baby. And it's in some ways not a Web3 tech. So it's a way in which you sort of have much more efficiency in doing these massively multiplayer sort of experiences. At the moment, if you're doing a real-time sort of shooter game, you're limited to about 150 players in any one space, just because of bandwidth sort of issues in the current architectures. And what MSquared is doing is allowing people to sort of have a layer, so the developers don't have to do anything complicated. They're just sort of writing to existing code. But behind the scenes, it sort of clusters up all these cloud servers and does a lot of compression and sort of clever stuff, so you can get thousands of people in the same sort of space. Now, as he points out, you have to, if you invent something like that, you have to then, someone has to invent the game that works for it. You can't just give everyone, if you give 1,000 people in a space of guns, it's just, it's just sort of chaos. It's not really fun. So the sort of problem, and the problem, that's sort of the issue with every technology, and certainly for Improbable, they've invented interesting technology, but their problem has always been, how do you get people to use it in an interesting way? Yes. So MSquared, from that point of view, is just like a base tech that people can use, and like Major League Baseball are doing a thing with it, and as you say, Yuga Labs are using it for their other side sort of ecosystem, which is a bunch of different sort of games, and they're trying out different, sort of experiences within that. Some of them are shooters, some of them are social. We'll see what the other stuff is. But MSquared also wanted to do its own thing, so it decided to do this. I think it was just a sort of tech demo almost, called Chunked, which is a fully on-chain Minecraft. So you go into it and it looks like Minecraft, as much as, I'm not a massive Minecraft player, but the first version was you could basically mine blocks. And people, there wasn't really any crafting behind it. People just mining, and people mined out this entire world. And the second version has just gone live yesterday. So I'm not quite sure what the sort of point of that is. I had a quick go yesterday. But the point is also, it's using, as you mentioned, there's this blockchain called Somnia. So MSquared works across all EVM chains. So obviously it works with Ape Chain, which is what they're using for the other side stuff, and it works with this, obviously Ethereum, Polygon, all the usual stuff. But they have their own blockchain, sort of Somnia, which is in the way of all blockchains. Improbable is sort of the main developer of it, but it has its own foundation and that sort of stuff, separate legal entity. But Somnia, as they say, is like the fastest EVM blockchain. So they're quoting 1 million transactions a second. Quite what that means, who knows? And you have to worry about things like finality and block finality. It's not just transactions. But their point of view is they've spent a lot of time in this space, a decade, building in these sort of massively multiplayer, distributed sort of game systems. And I just think if you put a lot more data on chain and you have a really, really fast blockchain, you can sort of start doing really different things to the moment, which we can't do. Fully on-chain games are very slow, no matter really what blockchain you're doing. And if you start using L2s, they start to get fragmented. And they're just saying, super fast blockchain, do what you want with it. Think of things that you couldn't do before. So it was interesting from that point of view. Rob's obviously a very smart sort of guy who's thought about these things for a long time. So it's interesting. The conversation spiraled out of control, a little bit sort of unstructured. But I found it really interesting to sort of think about where we are currently with the technology and why it hasn't got to where we want it to be. And who knows if they're right or not? As I say, it's always the problem is you get the tech, and then what can people make with it that people who don't know anything about the tech want to do with it, which is sort of the problem we've had for blockchain. Has always been stuck about people just want to make money, and basically they want to make money at the expense of everyone else, or they don't care if they're making money at the expense of everyone else. That's sort of the problem we've had. So we'll sort of see. But it was, it's one of the podcasts I really enjoyed it at the time, but I sort of thought people aren't going to get it, but people are just not, because it wasn't very focused. So you just kind of think it's sort of how do you write a headline for a sprawling, interesting conversation about this technology?
Yeah,
I don't know if I did a good job on that.
Well, our children are really gotten into chunked today. The Minecraft players too. So they just like this idea of like a Minecraft being on chain that they can.
Well, I just think, as I said to him, it's I think they didn't really realise what they had at the time, that it was so popular that fully on chain Minecraft. Everyone knows what Minecraft is to some degree, and if you put everything on chain, it's a little bit like Terra Luma isn't a fully on chain game, but if all the assets of an MMORPG are fully on chain assets, everything's an asset. That'd be quite interesting in a very different way. Sort of Angry Dynamite's the Craft World game. All those assets. It's a very simple game. It's an idle game, but as soon as you have all these assets on chain, you start to get some interesting stuff.
Good. Right. Finally, then the South Korean Web3 game developer Delabs Games, which is headed by former Nexon CEO Junmo Kwon. I think that's how you say it. They launched a Boxing Star X earlier in 2024, wasn't it?
No, it was it's April, I think it went live.
April, on Telegram, and it's seen some success actually. It's also on Kaya's Kaya blockchain.
It's actually more successful on Kaya than Telegram.
Oh, that's good. It was part of the most popular blockchain game sort of top bunch this month, wasn't it? It's done 100,000 users or so around there. Anyway, so Delabs has also now announced the pre-registrations are open for Ragnarok Libre, which is building on the kind of the Ragnarok IP. So that's interesting. They did sort of announced this pivot in 2024 that they were moving more towards mid-core games. Previously, they'd done the what's it called, lawnmower racing one.
Racing Stars. Rumble Racing Stars.
Rumble Racing Star. Yeah, that's right. Didn't quite work for them. That was a PC one, and then they sort of realized they needed to be on different distribution platforms, and so they're probably, you'd say, one of the first developers to see some significant success online and Kaya.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. We do have an interview with John McCon up on Blockchain Gamer.biz this week. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think it is interesting that we saw the first wave of stuff on Telegram, and that's sort of blown off quite significantly, I would say, at the moment. And then Line's come on, and D-Labs are South Korean, and obviously sort of Line is very big in Asia. So and previously as well, before blockchain they were working on a thing called Kakao, which is a social media that's big in Korea as well. So there's Line and Kakao, and Line and Kakao came together for the Kaya blockchain as well. So they have they know what works on those sort of platforms. Obviously, lots of people think that you can do something a little bit less casual on those platforms. That's why people go for this mid-core. We'll have to sort of see. It's interesting that the Ragnarok as an IP just keeps turning up all the time. This is about the third or fourth Ragnarok blockchain game. And one of them, the one on Ronin, didn't work at all. There's, I think, another one on Ronin as well. And this one, again, it's an idle one, which I think works well for these social platforms. But they, as you say, they sort of betted the company on this thing working. And actually, the boxing game is not really my sort of thing, but it is actually a fairly deep, it is, a fairly sort of performative 3D game where you actually are sort of tapping to do moves and stuff. You can see why it's doing well. Obviously, they've got a token coming out as well, so that sort of inflates all their activity because people are doing it for a token, and that's sort of the blessing and the curse of crypto at the moment. So we'll see if they can sort of make it stick. As much as you say these things, I'd be interested to play the Ragnarok Libre game.
Good. On that note, let's finish off. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.